This is TWiT.
So, Mike, you went down to see Starship launch.
I did. I went down to see it launch, but I did not end up seeing it launch.
Yeah.
I was down for the Monday attempt, which got within about 9 minutes, I think, before it got scrubbed with that valve issue. And then I actually had to come home for like various other life commitments. But yeah, I saw the lead up. I saw the incredible atmosphere down there. There are hundreds and hundreds of people on the beach and down on South Padre Island, which is just across this little strait from Boca Chica where they were launching. And yeah, it was really interesting. It was like a party. I mean, I was thinking, it felt like what some of the Apollo launches must have felt like, I mean, just how excited everybody was. And there's a giant rocket on the pad and you're not sure if it's going to lift off or if it's going to make it and all that sort of thing. It was a really incredible atmosphere. So yeah, I was definitely glad to have gone down there to kind of experience that firsthand.
Now, Boca Chica isn't exactly Miami Beach or Titusville, which have rows and rows of hotels on the beach and things to do and places to stay and all that. This is an area that kind of sprung out of relative obscurity when Elon Musk decided to put Starbase down there. What was that setting like? I mean, where the heck did you stay, for instance?
Yeah, I stayed in Brownsville, which is not that far away. It's about like a 45-minute drive, I guess. But you could also, you could come from the other direction and stay on like South Padre Island, which is pretty built up. It's pretty touristy. It's got nice beaches, nice sandy beaches and stuff like that. So there is infrastructure like around there, but actual Boca Chica itself, that beach itself is a little isolated. It's a wildlife preserve, or they've kind of carved it out right next to a wildlife preserve. But it is like a public beach, and that's been a focus of some like debate and some discussion from the local community about. It's a public beach, but they keep getting pushed out of it for tests and all that stuff. So it is pretty complicated. But I guess anytime you build a gigantic Mars rocket and launch it, it's going to be complicated because it's going to create a lot of mess and a lot of noise, which we can also talk about, I guess.
Yeah.
We saw some of that during the launch yesterday.
Well, and we're going to see a few minutes of recording from our good friend Tarek. But before we do, I just want to set the stage. So in case anybody's been living in a cave or prison cell for the last couple of years, well, prison cells have news. This is the first complete test of the Starship system. So we've seen Starship itself fly a couple of times successfully, more or less successfully, but that's just the top stage. When you add the Super Heavy booster to the bottom, you get a rocket that's 390 feet tall, which is a little under 30 feet taller than the Saturn V. And it's got 33 engines on the bottom and then 6 engines on the top stage. Starship itself is 160 feet tall and has a payload volume of 35,000 cubic feet, which makes it larger pressurized volume than the ISS, at least as of the last set of data we got.
Yeah.
The top stage is covered with silica tiles, not unlike what was used in the shuttle, but they're a little more standardized. They're little hexagonal things. Some of them are curved, some are flat, but made for much more rapid and inexpensive recovering of that surface. So this test was supposed to be about 90 minutes, and it would be suborbital, but close enough so that they could get a good idea what they were doing. So what was supposed to happen is it was supposed to launch, which would be the first actual launch test of the bottom stage, which is a big deal because nobody's ever successfully flown anything with 33 engines on it. It was supposed to stage. Starship would continue boosting up into this near orbital trajectory. The first stage, Super Heavy, would come down in the Gulf of Mexico, which it did, although it was supposed to come down in one piece, not many. And then Starship would continue on to just off the coast of Hawaii and come down, hopefully make a soft landing on the water there. So before we continue, why don't we go ahead and roll our recording from Tarek and hear what he heard, and for those of you watching video, see what he saw.
After an issue on the booster that the team is working on, but it sounds like they've cleared it, and we're waiting. They're going to start at T-minus 40 seconds, and then count down to liftoff. There it is. Are you going or are you stuck?
creative language there from the audience, not Tarek. So it's interesting that sounds a lot more like a Saturn V launch than a shuttle launch. A shuttle launch was a very low, boomy thing. But with this, like the Saturn V, you get that kind of high-pitched crackling noise after a while. And we're seeing a little bit more of it here. And it looked like it was going well. There are a few flashes coming out of the engines, which is always disturbing because you're afraid those might be parts of turbine blades or nozzle material or something. But as we could see from the video that they were tracking it, there at first a couple of engines out, and then by the time it was supposed to stage, depending on who you talk to, either 5 or 6 of the engines out of 33 were not running. I guess one stopped and restarted, which is pretty remarkable in itself. That's an engine test right there. And then unfortunately, when it got up to, I think it was 24 miles, at about 4 minutes, it was still boosting, which is a little longer than we thought it was supposed to boost, although you're never quite sure because it can be tough getting your information out of SpaceX sometimes, at least in a timely fashion. But it kept boosting, and then at the point that it was supposed to stage, it was still connected, and then it began a slow tumble. And those of us watching it, at least here on TV at home, I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder if, I knew it was supposed to do kind of a pitch over maneuver prior to firing to come back, but I didn't think it was supposed to do that well. It was still connected.
It was supposed. There were like a bunch of things. There were 3 main things that were supposed to happen about 2 minutes 50 seconds after launch. You were supposed to get first engine shutdown, then you were supposed to get stage separation, and then you were supposed to get like upper stage engine startup, all within like a 10-second span right around then. And we'll learn more from SpaceX when they put out a more definitive kind of account of what happened, but we could see that we didn't get stage separation, and it really looked like we didn't get first stage shutdown either, at least not totally, because you could see flame coming out of Super Heavy all the way up pretty much until the end. And like the end came with the automatic with the flight termination system. SpaceX commanded it at just under 4 minutes because it was obvious that it wasn't gonna make it. So they like put an end to the flight, and they blew up both of the vehicles, both Super Heavy and Starship, out over the Gulf. Like we can speculate about it. I mean, it's unclear exactly what caused those problems, but we know those were problems. SpaceX said they had multiple engine outs. It was they said there were 5 of them, I believe, or at least that's based on their kind of like in orbit, the like kind of diagram that they had of the Raptors during the webcast. It showed like 5 of them out toward the end of the flight, and we don't know why they suffered those outs, or we don't know why we didn't get stage separation or shutdown of first stage, if that's indeed what happened as it seemed. So can speculate about it, but we'll just have to wait to hear more from SpaceX about the sort of proximate causes of those issues.
It's interesting because up now we have the SpaceX recording of the rocket, and we're seeing these pulsing flashes coming out of the first stage. And, maybe that's something that's endemic to the Raptors. I've never seen it before. The only time I've seen it is when engines were setting up to fail. And yet, as far as we could tell, and as far as anybody's said, there were no explosive failures of anything, just multiple shutdowns, which is what you want an engine to do if things aren't going well. At least on this rocket. I mean, if you lost an engine on the Saturn V, that was 1/5 of your total thrust gone, and that was a very bad day, although it did happen once or twice, and they managed to just throttle the other ones longer to get to orbit. You'd think with 33, if you lose 3 or 4 or 5, again, you just throttle the rest of them a little longer to get where you want to go once the system's operational. And I think it's worth mentioning, you and I both watch the traditional press as they respond to these things. I did a bunch of radio yesterday. You probably did some as well, answering people's questions about this. And there's, this pernicious, continuing sort of drive towards, Elon blows up another rocket, it's a failure.
Yeah.
And, it takes a lot of breath to explain, look, this is kind of part of the plan. Yeah. And he was being very careful to hedge his bets up front and say, look, we clear the launch tower, I'll be a happy camper. I'm paraphrasing. But, again, this is a test of the first stage, never been flown before. It's extremely complicated. The only other time this even close to this number of rockets on any stage were flown. This is by the Soviet Union back in the 70s. They tried it 4 times. They all ended explosively.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've seen Starship land a couple of times, but in a sense, that's almost simpler than what they're trying to do today. So can you contextualize a little bit why this isn't a failure?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And some of he just blew up another rocket, Elon stuff. I mean, some of that stems from people being upset with him about other things, about the sort of direction he's sort of taken Twitter. Or and it's complicated, right? I mean, Elon's relationship with the press is pretty complicated for various reasons. But yeah, just in terms of this test, though, it's also important to note first off that this is a new engine. I mean, Raptor is not the same engine that flies in the Falcon 9 or the Falcon Heavy. It's designed to be more powerful and also to be kind of Mars ready. It burns liquid oxygen, liquid methane, which Elon has said repeatedly. You can source it on Mars. It's more ready to help us explore Mars. So we've seen Raptors fly before, as you were mentioning, on those kind of high altitude test flights of the upper stage, but we saw a maximum of 3 of them fly together on those flights. So putting 39 of them on one vehicle and expecting them all to work together perfectly the first time is really asking too much, I think. And yeah, I mean, this is how SpaceX operates, though, right? It's very different than the NASA approach. NASA is using taxpayer money. They have a lot of oversight from Congress. They're extremely risk averse because they know if something bad happens and it's going to call in all these people saying, what are you doing? That's a waste of money. You just blew up $1 billion, all that stuff. And, that's the system that they have to operate under. So they have to take a different approach. I mean, SpaceX has always been, we're going to build it and we're going to test it and we're going to learn from whatever happens. And so I personally think this was a pretty big success for them to have gotten 24 miles up and to have not totally destroyed the launch tower. I think that we've seen SpaceX do this before, where they test something that they build and then they come right back. I don't know how soon they're going to be able to come back with the next Starship launch. I mean, because I don't know if people have seen some of the photos that are circulating on Twitter about what those Raptors of the Super Heavy did to the launch mount at Starbase. It looks like it gouged out a pretty big crater under them, but that's all speculation. SpaceX hasn't commented on that officially about what Starbase looks like now after that launch. But just in general, SpaceX's whole system is, we're going to test it fast, we're going to build the next one fast, and we're going to learn from it and fly again fast. So they already have multiple Starships built or in production at Starbase. And so I'm sure that the next one has improvements already built in based on these first ones, which had kind of been in the hangar for a while. These vehicles that flew yesterday, Booster 7, which was the Super Heavy, and Ship 24, the upper stage, are kind of like a previous generation based on, and so what's going to fly next are going to be newer vehicles with more bells and whistles on them, more improvements. And that's the process. It's all iterative. So there will be incremental improvements on each flight. I mean, maybe the next one will fail too, and maybe the next one after that. But SpaceX always takes the longer view. They're planning on flying dozens of these things, and they will probably get it at some point, and it's probably going to be before a lot of people expect.
Well, you kind of touched on this, but I think it is important to note, when you're talking about, is it a failure or a success? This rocket was specifically designed to be something that could be built on an assembly line, and they're building them in some quantity. They've got either 2 or 3 more ready to go in a matter of weeks or months. So it's not like the SLS where you've got one very big, very, very expensive, by the end of the flight, over $4 billion rocket ready to go. These things are being built at some scale and much more affordably, and it's not taxpayer money. To your point about NASA being risk averse, I mean, I don't blame NASA. They can't fail because they'll have people crawling all over him, screaming and yelling, "How could you not succeed?" Elon could do it his way, and he does. And there's also a fair amount of back and forth in the Twitterverse and elsewhere about, you've orchestrated your engineers at Hawthorne to cheer even after it fell. Why are they cheering after it blew up? And, if I'm an engineer and I built this thing, especially if I was working on the Super Heavy as opposed to the upper stage, I'd be cheering too. I think there is a little bit of creative direction that goes on there. I've been to a couple of press conferences there where you probably have too at Hawthorne, where they put the media in this little tiny corral above this crowd of heads that you can't avoid having in the foreground of your shot.
Yeah.
And there's Elon and the team in the background doing whatever they do. But that said, we heard that crowd around Tarek, and they were doing the same thing. They were going bonkers because people are excited about this. And there's a lot of reasons to be excited about it because it's an incredible big picture. So speaking of which, I do want to talk about FAA licensing, but maybe you could talk a little bit about what the big picture is for this, the history of Starship.
Well, yeah, what the ultimate goal is, he's said many times, Elon has said repeatedly that he founded SpaceX about 20 years ago now with the express purpose of like helping humanity colonize Mars, help us become multiplanetary. We've all heard him say that many, many times now. And this vehicle is the one that he's been building toward, or what he's relying on to do that. And so, yeah, this is his and SpaceX's long-term vehicle of the future, sort of. What they intend to do with Starship is pretty much everything. He has said that eventually, when it's mature enough, he wants Starship to be doing pretty much everything that SpaceX does now and more. It's the vehicle that will launch their kind of next generation Starlink satellites, which will be bigger and more powerful than the ones that have like mostly been going up now. It'll be a crew vehicle. It'll be a point-to-point transportation here on Earth vehicle. It'll take NASA astronauts from lunar orbit down to the surface. They already have like a NASA contract to do that, starting with Artemis 3 in 2025, although that's an ambitious timeline. And they're private customers. He's booked 3 private Starship missions, from private customers. 2 of them are going to go around the moon, like with private customers on board. We don't know when those are going to happen. That depends on the developmental timeline. And then all that stuff is leading up toward going to Mars. And that's what he really wants to do with Starship. So once it becomes mature, and, we don't know when that timeline is going to be. We don't know when that's going to happen. We don't know if it's actually going to happen. This is still a complicated vehicle. We can look at the track record SpaceX has, which is extremely impressive, but you still can't assume that this is going to work just the way he wants it to. But if it does, or in some approximation of that grand vision, then it is going to be revolutionary. And if this thing is able to loft 165 tons of cargo to low Earth orbit, or mass, whatever you want to put on it, and it can fly for a few $1,000,000 a flight, which is incredibly ambitious, but maybe it's 10 times, maybe it's 20 million or 30 million or even 100 million. Even that would be revolutionary, right? That will enable us to do all sorts of things. We could conceivably get a Mars outpost up and going in a couple dozen flights or something. And then if it's that capable, then we could also launch science missions to like the ocean moons of the outer solar system, right? We could do all sorts of stuff with this thing. We can put anything on it. And if it's cheap enough and dependable enough, it can go anywhere. So, that's why all those people on the beach on South Padre Island are so excited. Some of them are excited because they're kind of SpaceX fanboys. There are definitely those people out there, right? But some of them are space enthusiasts, and they see the promise of this thing, and they see the excitement that is just inherent in having big dreams. A lot of the people that you talk to from the Apollo generation, they talk about how excited they are now because NASA's going back to the moon with Artemis, but also because of Starship, because they would say this is what spaceflight is supposed to be. It's supposed to be bold, and it's supposed to be extremely ambitious. And, it's not a knock against the shuttle or the International Space Station, which are doing which did exciting things in the shuttle's case. In the space station's case, they're doing important work to prepare for those longer journeys to the moon and Mars. But it's those longer journeys that get people excited. And a lot of people are just happy that there actually are plans now to try to make that happen.
Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. ACI Learning is a lifelong career training partner for audit,